Well, hello and welcome again to our daily devotionals at Christ Baptist Church. And we're finding ourselves in the book of Esther again. Today we're going through various books of the Bible. We've gone through Daniel, the books of Thessalonians, the book of Jonah, and now we're in the book of Esther. These are books that we're not in quite often, and it's good that we take time to really just read the Bible and understand what it says and what it means. And that's the intention here, to help you to say it's not really that frightening to read the Bible. You can pick up and read some of these books and stories that are incredible. And the book of Esther happens to be a story that actually has very much relevance to the current day, the current time period, because there is a festival that comes out of a Jewish festival that comes out of the book of Esther that's been practiced now for many thousands of years, almost 2,500 years. This festival has been practiced by Israel because of the book of Esther. And it's there. We're going to learn about it. Esther is the one book in the Bible that doesn't mention God anywhere. And you say, why is that? Why is it in there? Why is it considered to be a book of the Bible? Well, because Jesus considered it to be a book of the Bible. Because Esther is recorded history. It was tied to the Old Testament scriptures of the law and the prophets that's been around. And everybody's recognized that is the Word of God. And we find ourselves this morning in chapter 2 of Esther, and we're building a bit. It's not a book that teaches doctrine. It's the book that you read it and you understand doctrine after you've read the book, after you read the story, and understand this. And we saw in yesterday's devotion that we're in the time of Xerxes the king, the Persian king, from 483. He reigned about 485 to 465 BC for about 20 years. He reigned there. He came after Darius the First, and really he's about the third in succession from when Cyrus had let all the Jews go back to Jerusalem in Daniel's time. So this book very much ties to the book of Daniel. So essentially about 45, 50 years after Daniel prayed in Daniel chapter 10 for all the Jews to go back. Now we find ourselves in the book of Esther. And we saw in chapter 1, it is the third year of the king's reign, King Xerxes, who wanted to maintain the military campaigns of his father to attack the Greeks. He wanted to really wipe out the Greek Empire at that time and go to war with them. He had an empire that reigned, we see in verse 1 of chapter 1, from India to Ethiopia. That's pretty far. From India all the way to Ethiopia. And he was in the capital of Susa, which is above the Persian Gulf, up there over modern day Iran. And so he really had gone far all over where he was, essentially the modern world. And the action that took place was something that sets the stage for what's about to happen. So it's not a history book about the Persian king. It's going to be a history book about what happens to Israel and how God is always preserving Israel. But there's something else in the book of Esther that I want to talk about. And it's about something called providence. We talked about this yesterday. And we're going to see it here in chapter 2. In answer to this question, you've looked at your life and you said, man, how did I get here? It's a result of difficult decisions, maybe sinful choices. And I'm here and God can't use me now because. Well, understand, the book of Proverbs says the righteous and the evil, the righteous people and the evil people have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them both. You see, the Lord is over all things, all choices. And Romans 8:28 tells us that he works all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. There's nothing that you do or have done in your life that will destroy God's plan, that will make it to be where there's no hope at all. As a matter of fact, sometimes in this sinful world and situations that we find ourselves in, sometimes those are what God uses, the tools that God uses to actually bring together an amazing plan. An amazing plan. Sometimes it's difficult. If we were to look in the book of Matthew, chapter 1, and we see the genealogy of Jesus, there are 2 women mentioned specifically. There's no other women really mentioned there. There's 2. Who are they? Rahab, who was mentioned, and she gave birth to Salmon, and then eventually Obed, who became really the ultimate father of David. And just in pulling this up here for you, we can see that in Matthew, we see Rahab listed there. And Rahab is, in verse 5, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz is the central figure of Ruth, the book of Ruth. And Obed had Ruth, she was a Gentile, she was a Moabite. And Obed, the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David the king. So right there in the line of David, I guess there are 3 women listed. You got Ruth and you got Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. Her sinful choices put her right in line in Joshua chapter 2 to be the one who hid the spies. And she was alone saved out of Jericho when it fell down. So she could be tied into Israel, so she could be in the Israel's line, and so she would marry an Israelite, and then she would be in the line of Jesus. Ruth the Moabitess, who had nothing to do with Israel, also came in, and she was in line with Obed. And the other there, as we know as David, was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. So David was an adulterer. David was an adulterer. And what did God do with that? He used that to say, in your repentance, you marry Bathsheba, and you have Solomon who built the greatest temple, and that's in the line of Jesus Christ. See, God uses all these things providentially so that we will have them and learn them. Sin does not destroy God's plan. God works His plan through a sinful world. And we are so just, I say grateful, so thankful that our God takes the messes we make and turns them into something amazingly wonderful. As a matter of fact, He uses them to execute a plan that makes us again just turn back and go, whoa, I'm immediately impressed that He is our God. And He does it with our messes. He does it with what happens. Sometimes they're not messes that you make, but they're messes thrust upon you. And you think because this happened, like for example a coronavirus, now I'm ruined. Now I can't do anything. Well, you know what? God uses that in what we call providence. He's always going to accomplish His plan, and He always knows who you are and what you need. And we're going to see this in chapter 2 now. Chapter 1, it unfolded with Xerxes the king. Most powerful, more powerful at that time, more powerful than the kings in China. Everywhere. Archaeology has proven that. He had the most land. He'd inherited everything, the greatest wealth. And he had really wanted to go on a military campaign. And what we see is he had a 180-day parade festival showing how great he was. In a drunken state, he asked for his wife to come and be paraded in front of all of his guests. She wouldn't do it. So he got with his counselors and he fired his wife. He said she's no longer queen. Got rid of her. Again, in a drunken state, taking this advice. All that set the stage. To where now we have in chapter 2, these words, after these things. So after these things, when the king settled down. Now the king is realizing something. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So now he's remembering he doesn't have a wife. Now the king's realizing, oh boy, I really blew it. I don't have a wife. I have a problem. Now I'm going to jump ahead to give you some context here, very, very specifically. that what we see here is this right here in chapter 2, verse 16. There's a time stamp that Esther, when she was taken to King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, and she accomplished the task. The very end of verse 16 says, in the 7th year of his reign. I just wanted you to pick that up. In the 7th year of his reign. Now, where were we in chapter 1? In the 3rd year of his reign. 4 years have passed. 4 years. Now, it took about a year for chapter 2 to take place. So really about 3 years have passed. It was in the 3rd year, and then 3 years took place. What happened in those 3 years? I'll tell you what happened. History tells us what happened. He went off on a military campaign against Greece and fought in what's called the Peloponnesian Wars. Had one of the greatest battles in the history of the nation of Greece, a battle at Thermopylae, where just hundreds of Greek soldiers took on somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 million Persian men and tried to hang on. And as they lost their land battle, they actually defeated the Persians in the sea, even though they were greatly outnumbered. And so Xerxes suffered a great defeat, a huge defeat. One of the greatest victories in all of Greek history. The Battle of Thermopylae and the Peloponnesian Wars and the naval battles that all took place. So now here he comes. Xerxes comes back. He's not happy. He comes back. And what does he come back to? Oh yeah, where's my wife? I don't have a wife. Oh my. See, God set the stage for him realizing he doesn't have a wife. What's he going to do? Well, verse 2 tells us how these attendants really played up to the king. The king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. That's their solution. Queen Vashti was amazing. She was the most beautiful in all the kingdom. We see her that so much that he wanted to display her beauty to all the people, for she was beautiful, verse 11 says in chapter 1. It made a real point. The Bible makes a real point, for she was beautiful. So what are we going to do to get the right queen, to have the right line to come in? Well, the king wasn't about needing an offspring. History tells us that Xerxes, from a previous wife, already had a son in place to give everything to. So he didn't need to have somebody who came from the right royal family and the right deals and linked all that up like they do in England. Didn't need all that. He's already got an offspring. So now what do we need for what the king wants in a wife? Well, verse 2 tells us three characteristics. Beautiful, young, virgin. I need somebody who fits those 3 categories. Don't need him to do math. Don't need him to handle budgets. Don't need him to figure out, planning and get directions on where we're going. No. Beautiful young virgins to be sought by the king. And so, what he did, in verse 3, the king appointed overseers in all the provinces, 120 provinces from India to North Africa, to go and gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch. He's in charge of the women. Give them cosmetics. I mean, they need to go and get Ralph Lauren and all of this, as many perfumes as possible. And I want this to be the show. So you'll get beautiful young virgins from 127 provinces and bring them to Susa. That's the plan. Doesn't sound like it'd be God's plan as written for Israel in the book of the Bible, but see, God's not using them. He's using the Persian nation here who doesn't know him. He's using sinful people right now who don't know him. This is what's happening. In verse 4, this is what the eunuchs are telling the king. Then yet let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti. So they got to please the king in all kinds of matters. Well, the king's certainly like that. This is going into an area that we understand is moving toward something that goes completely against the Bible. Completely against the Bible. It's going into something that needs some parental guidance here in reading the book of Esther. Probably a little worse than reading Song of Solomon. Parental discretion is advised. Because the king is saying, this is how I'm going to choose my bride. You're going to line them all up, and then they're all going to just come to me, and whichever one actually that I find the greatest pleasure in, maybe that won't be the queen. And so this is what he sets up. Now, we understand that. We see that. Look how the book is written. Verse 5. Now I'm going to tell you about something else. Verses 5 to 7. A whole nother scene. It's like the movie just shifted to a completely another scene here. It says, now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. I want you to know that this particular Jew is from the line of Saul, from the line of Benjamin. And not only that, he's the one who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who've been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. So Jeconiah was a king of Judah, and during one of the earlier deportations, he'd taken some of the royalty. So some of Mordecai's father's grandfathers were part of that royalty. So he's of this line that were ruling in Judah from the tribe of Benjamin. So he's a true Benjamite. Just so you understand, Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. I mean, a true Israelite. True indeed. In Philippians chapter 3, Paul talks about his lineage and how he was an 8th day person, meaning he was circumcised on the 8th day. Pharisee of Pharisees, Benjamite. And so, you've been taken to exile, and there he is. And verse 7, here's the real crux right here. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now, let me tell you about Esther. The young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. The writer tells us something here. Beautiful of form, had a shapely figure, whatever shapely was back then, and of face and beauty and eyes. So she was attractive. I think that the writer wants us to understand she fit all the criteria, but the eunuchs were trying to tell the king. Here she is, and she's living with Mordecai, who is raising her. He is her cousin, but he's quite a bit older. He's raising her because she has no parents. Just thought you might want to know that right here while the king is getting his instructions. So, while they're living in captivity, now we don't understand why they're in captivity, but they are, because Cyrus told all the Jews to go back. But they're stuck here living in Susa, modern day Iran. So it came about when the command and decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered at the citadel of Susa in the custody of Hegai. Well, they got Esther. She got caught up in this dragnet, and she's got to go there too. So she was taken to the king's palace in the custody of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. So they got all these young women who were called virgins here, which typically means young unmarried women, but that would also mean that they've never been with men before. Verse 9, now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids in the king's palace, transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Now there were 2 harems, we're going to learn about it, but there's this harem right now for all of the incoming women. That's one harem. A harem is actually a word that we find in Hebrew as well as in the Persian words, and it means kind of be dedicated. A harem, it's what's devoted, what's devoted to God, devoted to the band. That's when God said to Joshua, don't take anything out of Jericho. Why? Because it's in the harem. It belongs to me. So harem is everything that belonged to the king. But notice there in verse 9, how quickly the writer writes this. Now the young lady, see she's young, pleased the Hegai, just like Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 1 and 2. He got favor with the people who was in charge of these new slaves. Found favor with this person who's expert in knowing what the king's going to like. And so he quickly, notice that word there, quickly provided her with cosmetics and food. We got to get this girl buffed up. Now again, here's something else. Verse 10, Esther did not make known to her people or kindred, for Mordecai instructed her that she should not make them known. Here's a case where Mordecai is saying, don't tell everybody you're a Jew. Now again, this is not New Testament. This is not saying don't share the gospel. This is saying, if you tell people you're a Jew, you're going to die. So I want to tell you something here. Just don't say anything. He's acting as her father for her safety. In verse 11, every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. So this is the guy who's acting as father, and he's letting his daughter go off into a harem to be subjected to the king in a pagan ceremony, not even a ceremony, just a pagan relationship, a one-night stand. But he had to because he's the king. Now Mordecai could have fought, they could have withheld Esther, and they both would have been killed. That was the option. So they said, we're going to go with what they're forcing us to do, and we're trusting in the Lord. Don't tell them you're a Jew. Just let's see what the Lord says here. Let's see what the Lord's going to do. They trusted in the Lord as they walked forward. Mordecai's going back and forth. I want to see how Esther's doing. I want her to have good favor with the government that's coming up. Now, verses 12 to 14 tells us what the procedure is. So at the turn of each young lady comes in, at the end of her 12 months under the regulations for the women. And then it describes, these women were selected, but they had to go through a 12-month beautification process. This is like fixer-upper. You take all the women and you go fixer-upper. Here we go. This is going to be 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and cosmetics for women. 12 months before the first one comes in to see the king. This means he's getting them all prepared. And the young lady would go into the king in this way, and anything that she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So she'd look around and what's going to please the king here? Can I bring him something that smells good, something that tastes good? What can I bring, and how am I going to do this? What am I going to wear? I got one chance. I got one night. Well, she would go in there. Verse 14, in the evening she would go in. See, they didn't come in the day, they went in the evening. Because the king was going to sleep with this woman to determine if she would be the one to be his queen. And if he is pleased with it. So it's very self-centered, very ungodly, no question about it. The writer's trying to be discreet here, but this is the process that they were subjected to. So she would go in the morning, she'd return to the second harem. So she would start in the first harem because that's all the virgins. You go with the king, you got to go to the second harem, that's called the concubines. They're the ones who aren't virgins anymore. You got to go to that pool. And they would go to the second harem, to the custody of Shashgaz, king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. And she would not again go into the king unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Chances are, if she went there, it's kind of like the consolation bracket of a tournament. There's a chance you might come back in, the second round, like they do in rugby and soccer. You come back in the second pool and maybe win the championship. But there's really not much of a chance of that. If you got one defeat, you're probably not going to get back in and play again. Now, verse 15. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came in to go to the king, she didn't request anything except what the guy in charge of the women told her. She took his advice. He knew the king inside and out. He said, don't take anything. Don't mess with anything else. Do this. Whatever that was. And he advised it. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Boy, what a statement that is. He didn't say Esther found favor in the eyes of the king. All the people around saw it. She was young, she was beautiful, she was a virgin, and she behaved with great dignity. She understood how to follow what the advice was she was given. She didn't say, oh, I know how to do this. She wasn't a woman who said, I know how to trick a man. I know how to get a man on my side. No, she didn't have any of that. She walked with dignity. And she found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So verse 16, so Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So the king had come back from a defeat, realized he didn't have a wife. Now he sets this whole thing up that took a year, a whole year, for the women just to get prepared. They had to gather the women and then a year to prepare them. And now it's in the 7th year of his reign. And he's lined up a different woman each night coming. Different woman each night. He doesn't care. He doesn't care who they are. He doesn't care anything about them. And there she is. At verse 17. Between verse 16 and 17, there is nothing that we know. We just know she was taken to see him in verse 16. And then verse 17, this is how the Bible presents it. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins. Notice those words. It doesn't say the king was infatuated with her. It didn't say the king lusted after her. It didn't say any of that. She's the kind of person that had immense worth and dignity because of who she was, regardless of the situation she was put in, regardless of how she was having to go to the king, do something against her will, do something against God's law. And she was going there, and she went in with great dignity. And look how the writer presents her and how the Lord presents her in his word. She comes to him for that one night stand, all cosmetic up and bringing what the guy in charge of the women said to do. She followed instructions. As a result of that, the next words are, the king loved her more than any other woman. And she found favor and kindness with him. He was kind to her. And so you know what he did? He set the royal crown on her head. Made her queen instead of Vashti. Right then and there. No more. He did not send her back to the second harem. So you're not a concubine now. You're a wife. You're a queen. You're in a status. We now have moved, because of what Esther did. King Xerxes changed. Esther didn't change. She's still who she was. She's still the godly woman that she was. And Xerxes changed. This is right out of 1 Peter chapter 3. That says a godly wife, through her prayers and her submission, will actually change her unbelieving husband. Now, this doesn't say Xerxes became a believer, but what it says is he treated her immediately with kindness and respect and dignity and said, I really care about Esther. She is above all these other women who are... You know what the king just realized? I think what the king realized is he was just after his own sexual appetites. And so he's after women to say, who can please me the most? So they all appealed to that. They all went down to the basest level, the level that is quickly satisfied, and then you're over and done with, and you go back to the other harem. I don't care about you anymore. Esther came in saying, no, there's more to me than just that. Sure, there is that. We will be together. You command it. Sure, that's how God made us. And we will try to be attracted to each other. But I've got a lot more to offer than that. And I'm letting you know, here I am. And she rose above everybody. Now, there's also something here that we see in verse 20, and I'll get there in a moment, where she didn't make known her people. But what happened in verse 7, after 17, that he immediately crowned her king because she had so much more than the others. And so the king immediately gave a great banquet called Esther's banquet for everybody, made a holiday for the province, and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. And so now, when the virgins were all gathered together the second time, and when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, so Mordecai is still there. See, he's been there the whole time. And we get this in verse 20. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. You see, one thing Esther did was she understood that Mordecai loved her as a father. He was her cousin. And he loved her as a father. He raised her. And he had the best advice. Don't tell him you're a Jew, at least not right now. There's no need to do that. These people aren't favorable to Jews. Let's see what God does here. We don't know. We're stuck here. We can't go back to Jerusalem. And you know what she did? In all that fame, in all that regality, being up top and now the new queen, she didn't say, oh, and I'm a Jew, and just display who she was in her prominence, and this is what I am, because she felt she could get something from it. No, she didn't do that. She listened to her father, being the one who raised her, Mordecai, and she respected what he said. And she held on to that dearly through her life, even when she had great success. This is something for our junior hires, our teenagers, young adults to understand. When your fathers are bringing you up, they have your welfare in mind. They want you to fear the Lord. They want you to think wisely, and they have good experience to tell you. Don't leave the house and just start thinking for yourself. Think about how you were raised and what you were told. It will be worth a lot. It was certainly worth a lot for Esther. She didn't say anything. And then what God tells us in verses 21 to 23, out of nowhere, we see Esther is now number one queen, but more than that, she wasn't queen because she just pleased Xerxes sexually. She was queen because she had great dignity, and we saw in verse 15, she found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. She rose above and said, my image of God characteristics are on display. Who I am is worthy, meaning I am worth having as a wife. I've got great value and to be treasured. And she just walked as she was raised by Mordecai, and that made the king infatuated because she was not like all the other women. She wasn't just going to try to please him sexually. She wasn't just after all that. She was Esther, a godly woman, and that was on display. She didn't rebel against the king or say no to everything he said, no. But she said, this is what I have to offer. And he saw that value. And so now she's placed in a position of queen, a position of power, a position of influence. And then one other thing gets put in here. In verses 21 to 23. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, again, he's always been there, 2 men of the king's officials, from those who guarded the door, they became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. That's a way of saying 2 guys got together and said, we know how to take the king out. I think we can kill him. We know the back way in, and we can come in behind, we can kill him. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Notice that. Esther informed the king how? In Mordecai's name. Esther told the king that Mordecai saw these 2 men and heard them plotting against the king. Again, loyalty to the king, loyalty to the government. But she's a Jew. Doesn't she want the Persians to fail? Nope. God put her there to be under the Persians, to serve him. And so in serving him, you serve the government you're under. And when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on gallows, and it was written, here's the key phrase, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So the king made sure they recorded Mordecai's name right there, who saved the king's life. Very important piece of information. God is setting the stage for providence. Because we don't know yet, we've only read 2 chapters, but we don't know yet what's about to happen. And it's going to unfold and explode tomorrow in chapter 3. It's going to explode. And what God's doing in his plan, God sees it about to explode, and before it does, he puts the chess pieces in place. And he does it in a world system filled with sin, with a king who's wanting nothing but sex and has ultimate power. And he has his people looking to serve him in a godly way, walking with dignity, having to deal with walking in that sinful path because they're under the government, under the king. The Bible doesn't say everybody's 100% righteous and going through. God uses this plate of spaghetti of sin everywhere, and he untangles it all out to achieve his purpose, which is going to be amazing what you're going to see in the next coming up chapters. Amazing, exciting adventure is going to be what's coming. Well, it's not so much adventure if you're living it in there because survival is at stake. But how he set Esther up in this situation with Mordecai, who really is the one who is fathering her, pastoring her along the way. That's what we see in Esther. So be thinking about providence and saying, no matter what's gone on in your life, no matter what's happened, no matter the situation you find yourself in, the circumstances, God uses all those things to accomplish his good, and you will see him on display in that way because of providence. God uses providence in so many ways because he's in control of everything. Every decision, even every decision that you make, really is under his sovereign control. And for that, we can be very thankful. We'll see you tomorrow.